Hello, Art Committee. Thank you for taking the time to go over this brief overview of Ian Jones and his educational report. Ian has many strengths, and most teachers can attest to his exemplar personal strengths. Ian is loved by his family. He is his papa's favorite and is known by many as Sweet Ian. Ian is introspective, a curious learner, and sensitive. As the second oldest of four, Ian stands out from the rest in his willingness to help and follow instructions in the home. He's also quite funny. Despite his reading difficulties, Ian still loves school. He is easy to wake in the morning and often the first to line up at the classroom door. Furthermore, Ian continues to persevere through his learning challenges. He has a love of books, reading, and each night enjoys being read to. Finally, you should know that Ian is really funny and fun to be around. This picture in the middle here was taken on a birthday date with Aunt Erin at Academy. We had a lot of fun. Now that the FIE has been completed, we know that Ian has numerous learning strengths too. We'll talk briefly about each and a little about what each means so that staff can capitalize upon these learning strengths and use them to overcome deficit areas or barriers to accessing the general education curriculum. The first cognitive strength that we'll look at, or learning strength, is Ian's fluid reasoning, which is characterized by the ability to deliberately but flexibly control attention to solve novel and on-the-spot problems that cannot be performed by relying on only previously learned habits or schema. Ian scored near above average range in analysis synthesis subtest, where his standard score was 119. And on this test, Ian was given instructions on how to perform increasingly complex procedures. The test involved learning in a miniature system of math, and here Ian scored higher on this task than any other test. Therefore, it can be said that Ian's fluid reasoning skills are intact and that these are strengths for Ian. Ian's short-term or working memory and his long-term retrieval are strengths. Ian's overall standardized score for working memory was 106, which indicates that he is easily able to encode, maintain, and manipulate information that is in his immediate awareness. Working memory is important in learning that requires a child to hold information in their mind for a short time and then direct the focus of their attention on the information while being able to perform some operation on the information. When one-on-one, Ian has no trouble focusing his attention to novel tasks. Long-term retrieval is Ian's ability to store, consolidate, and retrieve information over periods of time. The subtests here included associative memory, or the ability to remember previously unrelated information, and meaningful memory, or story recall, the ability to recall increasingly complex narratives and other forms of semantic information. Ian's cognitive abilities in these areas are said to be intact. Visual processing includes the ability to perceive complex patterns and mentally simulate how they might look when transformed. Visual memory is the ability to remember complex visual images over short periods of time. I see these strengths in Ian when we do puzzles together. He's quick to remember images and simulate transformations in his mind. Ian's crystallized intelligence, which is also known as comprehension knowledge, was said to be intact. Crystallized intelligence includes a student's breadth and depth of acquired knowledge and effectively applying this knowledge. Though not as strong as his other cognitive areas, Ian's lexical knowledge or vocabulary and general verbal knowledge or knowledge about one's culture are both in the average range. Since Ian began school, he has struggled with reading. Decoding print on a page is a slow, laborious process for Ian. However, he hasn't given up. This summer, the FIE was able to pinpoint areas of difficulty for Ian, which we will use to create a meaningful IEP for Ian. In the next few slides, we'll look at the areas that have been found to be cognitive deficits as measured by the Woodcock-Johnson 4 and staff reports. Per teacher reports, Ian struggles with oral communication. Ian is said to be below average in his ability to follow oral instructions and remember and follow through with instructions. Given his cognitive assessment, this is not due to limited working memory, but better represented in the cognitive areas discussed over the next few slides. Both math and English language arts teachers report difficulties. So even though Ian does not struggle with acquiring mathematics, he does struggle with the oral language that is involved in the classroom setting, which include his ability to follow and understand oral instructions and follow through with assignments. Ian's math and language arts teachers also report Ian is below average in the following oral language competencies: comprehending classroom discussion, displaying adequate vocabulary for grade level, responding appropriately with relevant information, and organizing and relating ideas and information. It is likely that Ian will require specialized support to include accommodations and access to printed materials in each of his general education classes. As a note, many of the oral communication skills that Ian struggles with can be and are often serviced through speech and language services. Unfortunately, Ian was dismissed from speech when he moved to Tomball. The Woodcock-Johnson 4 oral battery confirms teacher reports. The following areas were found to be deficits in Ian's oral communication skills and abilities. His oral expression standardized score was an 82, and listening comprehension was an 81. Though these scores are low and some are in the low average range, they are significantly lower than his overall cognitive ability and thus will require services and accommodations to access the general education curriculum. It is noted on page 4 in the FIE, a claim is made that there are, quote, no concerns in the areas of language. However, teacher reports in the Woodcock-Johnson 4 provide conflicting information. Furthermore, the behavioral concerns that are discussed later in the FIE are better attributed to language issues, not conduct issues. Ian's language scores when compared to that of his peers is depicted here. Let us recall that Ian's overall cognitive abilities have been found to be in the average range. However, he is one or more standard deviations away from the average in his ability to communicate and comprehend oral language. Briefly, we'll look at Ian's health and motor abilities. Ian has had a significant history of health concerns since birth, and all are documented in the FIE on pages 4 through 6. Staff should be aware of and understand that due to continued medical conditions, absences will continue to occur. Because Ian is prone to health issues and has plans for continued cranial and facial reconstruction, school staff are encouraged to consider and plan for homebound instruction as part of the IEP. From time to time, it is likely that Ian will need homebound instruction, not due to a willful choice to miss school, but because of his medical fragility. On pages 7 and 8 in the FIE, emotional and behavioral factors are discussed. According to language arts, math, and science teacher observations, Ian is reported to have difficulty with the following behavioral deficits: staying on task, motivation, which is in math only, and initiating activities and working independently. However, as the ARD committee understands Ian's language deficits, his processing speed deficits, and his deficits in auditory processing, which are all in the very low or impaired range, a Comprehensive rationale for these difficulties has been provided. However, these reports do indicate a need for Ian to have additional support in his core subject classes. If staff feel that behavioral issues impede Ian's learning, which seems to be the conclusions made by teacher reports and observation, the IEP team needs to address these concerns. In the FIE, it is reported that Ian has a number of behavioral issues, which are likely language related, that impact his own learning. However, on page 8 in the FIE, the box is checked no. The ARD committee may want to discuss how best to assist Ian in the classroom so that teachers can overcome barriers related to language and know what to do on class assignments. Though Ian's overall fluid reasoning is said to be in the average range, it is worth noting that he scored much lower in the area of concept formation. Another interesting finding is that on the analysis synthesis subtest, Ian scored in the high end of the average range with a standardized score of 119, while the subtest of concept formation was significantly lower and considered a deficit. Perhaps one of the most significant impact in terms of deficits is Ian's processing speed, which impacts all educational areas. Processing speed is the ability to perform simple, repetitive cognitive tasks quickly and fluently. Those who have spent time with Ian can attest that he processes information very slowly, requires extra time to respond, and to complete his work. In the classroom, I've noticed that kids with processing speed deficits struggle with the speed that they do things. It's almost as if you can see the wheels turning slowly in their heads when they're working things out. It's a tough disability to have. General education and special education teachers need to have a good understanding and training of what it looks like in the classroom and how they can assist. Specific recommendations are provided in the FIE on page 12. Students with processing deficits have difficulty with processing information rapidly, completing assignments on time, taking time tests, making comparisons rapidly, and copying. In this graphic, we're able to see where Ian's processing speed falls when compared to students in his classroom. Ian's most significant deficit is in the area of auditory processing. His scores were mostly in the low range, and one fell in the low average range. Auditory processing is the ability to detect and process meaningful nonverbal information and sounds. Furthermore, Ian has documented hearing loss from both school staff and ongoing treatment from audiologists. In the summary paragraph on page 13, it is said that staff indicate that communication skills are not a concern. However, both staff reports and the Woodcock-Johnson 4 provide contradictory information. It is possible that staff are unaware of the characteristics that processing, speed, and communication deficits have on instruction and academic behavior. For this reason, the family will not use staff perception to make educational plans, and instead will refer to the standardized measures provided by the FIE. Ian's auditory processing and phonological processing standardized scores are presented here graphically. Looking at this visual, it's evident that these are areas that must be addressed in the IEP. Note, the family has requested a dyslexia evaluation to determine if the specialized and direct instruction in phonological and phonemic awareness can benefit Ian and help him to better access grade level content area, which he has shown that he is more than capable in. However, the reading of print has inhibited his achievement. On page 14 in the FIE, pertinent findings from the report are summarized. Ian is to possess strengths in his visual processing, his short-term or working memory, comprehension knowledge, fluid reasoning, and long-term retrieval. Deficits included on page 14 include auditory processing and processing speed. However, there also should probably include the oral language deficit. Sources that support this deficit are teacher reports, classroom observations, and the Woodcock-Johnson 4 oral language battery. Because oral language abilities are required across all school settings, Ian will need services and supports to help him to be successful across academic areas that involve language, and particularly in subjects that require reading of print. Staff may wish to reread observations included in the FIE now that they understand the cognitive deficits and weaknesses that Ian has. Teacher input, observation, and standardized norm reference tests substantiate and affirm that special education services are warranted across all subject areas. More observational data and summaries that substantiate and affirm special services can be found on page 19 in the FIE. Ian's academic achievement that has been most impacted by his cognitive impairment is in the area of basic reading. Scores for basic reading, reading comprehension, and reading fluency were significant deficits for Ian. It is noted that these deficits are expected and likely the result of the phonological processing cognitive weaknesses that Ian possesses. Thus, to improve achievement in reading, which includes comprehension and fluency, the phonological issues must be addressed with specialized instructional program. The IEP needs to include a goal that is specific to word attack or decoding, or using phonetic skills to decode letter combinations, vowel patterns, etc. Ian will need explicit and systematic instruction and structural analysis, which is more specific than reading fluency or comprehension goal. Until the dyslexia evaluation is complete, the ARD can address this area with a reading, decoding, or structural analysis goal. When we look at Ian's reading achievement overall, we see the true impact of his specific learning disability, or SLD. These findings tell us that any academic subject that requires reading or print will need special services. The family would like to consider how access to assistive technology can level the playing field for Ian. This would include receiving audio versions of all printed text, screen readers for technology-based instruction. To be successful and guarantee equitable access to the general education curriculum content, as an ARD team, let's be deliberate in training Ian to access these tools regularly as part of his daily classroom experience. We'd like to avoid as much as possible simply having a paraprofessional or teacher's assistant read assignments aloud to Ian, which can establish a pattern of dependence on adults and inhibit academic independence. It's also important to note here that any grade level reading needs to be modified or accessed via technology access tools that provide reading aloud of written print. Less formal measures conducted by school staff, such as Renaissance, UBAR, etc., suggest that Ian is reading 3 to 4 grade levels behind his peers. And the Woodcock-Johnson 4 indicates achievement at less than the 13th percentile, and even lower for comprehension and fluency. As such, Ian should not be presented with grade level text and be expected to be independent with it when his instructional level has been found to be 3 or more years below his current grade level. Doing so will impact Ian's motivation and love for reading. On pages 34 and 35 in the FIE, specific recommendations are made that assist teachers in understanding the services, goals, accommodations, and modifications that are needed as a result of Ian's specific learning disability. The family requests that pages 34 and 35 from the FIE be printed and distributed to general education staff, special education staff, and all specialists to assist in a better understanding of what Ian needs help with in each of his classrooms. These specific recommendations are continued on page 35. Thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about Ian and a little bit more about how he learns. We are looking forward to collaborating with staff to create an individualized education program, or IEP, that customizes and personalizes Ian's daily educational experience, that aims to close known educational gaps, and provides meaningful goals and accommodations that will assist him in accessing and mastering the general education curriculum.